Okay, good morning. Here we are in the hot summer days of Tammuz. And, it's definitely a question in the times that we live in, how to be able to sense God's guidance in our lives and to feel that we're not alone, that God is really with us moment to moment. And the question definitely could arise as to how do we do that? So it so happens that God, in his great kindness, provided us and all of us, all of Am Yisrael for all time, that's men, children, you're a Levi, you're a Kohen, with what is called the 6 constant mitzvot, or duties of the heart. They're also called the 6 constant mitzvot. So, and they create those 6 mitzvot. Maybe I'll put it up on a screen share for a minute. We'll do it maybe one more time later on, but here it is for the moment, so you can just read them. Done. Okay, so those are the 6 constant mitzvot. We, all Jews at all times, in all situations, no matter you're male, female, what your age, whether the Beis HaMikdash is yet revealed or not, believe in the existence and providence of God, negate the belief in other gods, believe that God is one, love of God, fear of God, and shielding the mind from negative thoughts. I'll just leave that on for a moment because I see people now are coming in. So we're going to be looking at a book. I wonder if you'll be able to see this with that up. Do you see me also? People see me? Okay. So we're going to be learning from this book, even though I don't see myself. Do you see the book? Living in Divine Space, which is a seminal book by Rav Ginsburgh and is really beautiful in terms of the information. It's very, very, very deep in terms of the information. I'll stop the screen share. I'll bring that up another time. It's really very deep in the information around how one actually can make a alive, divine, aware, connected, godly space in your life through these 6 constant commandments. And I really felt like this would be a very good time. It's also about building that living divine space. And we're in the 3 weeks where we're supposed to be constantly aware of building the house for God. So they're connected, this divine space that we can choose to live in, that's a given to all Jews, and the house of God, which is a divine space that we hope to really be successful in building during these weeks and actually physically, literally all be able to do, go up to Yerushalayim and walk right in there and hear the new words of the Torah, Torah Chadash. So the book, which is called, we'll just show it again now that I can actually see myself, which is called Living in Divine Space. We're going to be going through actually the introduction of it, which I feel is important, begins with a phrase, B'kol libi dirashtecha. With all my heart, I seek you, God. With all my heart, I seek you. And let's find out why the Rav chose to begin the whole book with that pasuk. Seeking God with all our hearts is the essence of Jewish meditation. Good, somebody got on that was trying to get on, great. So seeking God with all of our hearts is the essence of Jewish meditation and Jewish awareness. And in particular, in order to find God and reveal him in this world, we have to actually seek God. We have to take an proactive approach. God placed us on earth and concealed his presence in order to play with us the most well-known and holy game called hide and seek, right? In our world where God is, the truth of God is not necessarily visible, so God is hidden, godliness is hidden. We know that also there are many different ways that God gives us through the mitzvot, through learning, through prayer, through hashgacha pratis on a moment-to-moment basis for revelation of godliness. But in this world, godliness is veiled. behind many veils. And it's our task to actually seek God, even though there are the veils, to actually search and seek for God inside the multiplicity of the world, where it is that we can actually find him. By consciously seeking God, we bring God joy. Isn't that wonderful? That's really a wonderful thing to think about, that just by consciously wanting to connect with and seeking God, this brings nachas and joy to the Eibishter, as it were, and fulfills God's desire in creation. Our deepest need is to reveal God in our lives, and this is God's will as well. We need to reveal God. We need to feel the presence of God and God's guidance, and actually be very tuned into the hashgacha pratis of godliness in our lives, and the guidance, the messages that God is sending us. We've talked about this in the past, from that super conscious realm called Keter into our consciousness, to enliven our consciousness, help us make decisions, help us make choices, help us be aware from moment to moment how we're going to walk on the path of godliness. And so the seeking of God is a combination of all of these things. And the question really comes up is to how? How are we going to find God? Where are we going to find God? Where are we going to seek for Hashem? So God reveals to us his ways, the paths and roads along which he himself walks, so to speak, which is the Torah Emet. The commandments of the Torah are the ways of God, the place to go when seeking God. If we wish to discover and sense God's continuous revelation to us on earth, yesh ma'ayin, constantly being revealed, we must meditate upon the aspects and precepts of Torah that are not restricted by the barriers of time and space. Now, that's a very interesting concept to hold on to. We're going to be looking at those precepts in the Torah that are not restricted by time. I have to say the Shema by such and such a time, or by space. I have to be in this Yantif, or I have to be standing in the Beis HaMikdash, or I have to be a Levi, a Kohen, an Israelite. That time and space, there are aspects of the Torah that are not boundaried by particular time and space. And for this reason, the most fundamental approach to Jewish awareness, Jewish meditation, is based upon what we call the 6 constant commandments of the Torah that we just showed on the screen. And they're called the duties of the heart. We'll just flash that one more time. That screen share, so people can see it. Those are the 6 duties of the heart. Okay, so you can take a look at that. I also put that up on the In-Gathering WhatsApp group, so you can see it there too. Okay, brief. I'm into brief screen shares. I hope that wasn't too fast. Okay, Kabbalah and Chassidut emphasize Jewish connection, Jewish meditation, as an essential technique in communication with God. I just want to make a segue here and say that when we're using the word meditation, we're not talking about it in a regular sense in the secular world. We're not talking about meditation practices. We're talking about focused thought, focused intellectual conceptualization. And it's really a lot of work to enter into communion and into communication with God. That's what's being talked about, an active awareness and dialogue, right? So this is a certain way of communicating with God. With regard to this meditation, as regard to any growth process, there are 3 stages of spiritual development that parallel something that is really actually a mathematical concept that we live with in the spatial time-oriented world. And that is that there is the concept of a point, a line, and an area. He's going to explain them, and then he's going to bring them back into Al Pi Chassidut, how they relate to us as in Am Yisrael. So in a narrow sense, a point, actually also a yud is called a point in the Aleph Beit. A point is a zero-dimensional mathematical phenomenon. It's just a point. It has no dimensions. It's where everything starts. So that's a point. And then a line, you know, whether you want to think horizontal, the horizon, or vertical, a tree growing up, a line is one-dimensional. And an area is two or more dimensional. The Sefer is called Living in Divine Space by Rabbi Yosef Ginsburgh. In human consciousness, the state, now he's going to bring the definitions further. In human consciousness, the state of a point is the experience of remaining static, meaning you're not moving, nothing is moving, everything is static. We know that's not what the Rebbe wanted. The Rebbe wants us to be on the move and growing all the time, and so does Hashem. But there is within life the concept of a point, which means being static. You're not moving ahead. There's no sense of progression and growth. And then the state of the one-dimensional line is the dynamic experience of motion, and it's at a constant, unchanging speed. So that's interesting. There's a progression, there is motion, but the speed is not changing. It's constant, steady, one speed. Go ahead. This type of velocity is called linear velocity. And then the two-dimensional or beyond two-dimensional concept that we call an area is the experience of acceleration or ever-increasing speed. And mathematically, this is an acceleration that has a multiple of dimensions to it on a mathematical level. So now he's going to take it deeper and bring it back more into the realm of Chassidus. Defined in a broader, more profound sense, the point is not meant to be taken literally as zero-dimensional, nor the line to be understood as one-dimensional. These are actually three progressive stages meant to be understood in relationship to one another. And now here we are. We're going to tie it into human beings and obviously Am Yisrael. The point is the point of departure in relation to our spiritual journey ahead. So whenever a person is on a journey, let's say, you know, I woke up today and there's like a plan, a thought in my head, what I'm going to do, but there's a starting point. There is a point of just beginning to stand or sit and focus. Biduk, focus at that moment. This is where I'm going. This is the plan for the day. It doesn't mean it's going to unfold that way, but that's the point of departure, the point of focus and beginning on the spiritual journey. The line is the consciousness of actually progressing towards our goal. So then suddenly we switched from a thought of this is the point of departure to bringing in the realm of consciousness of progressing towards what we set up maybe as mini goals during our day. And the area is the experience of reaching the goal, possessing it, and being possessed by it. And the Tanya talks a lot about this, that when we are thinking about something, that we are trying to wrap our mind around, that our mind is contemplating it and we are trying to grasp the details of an idea, a concept, a new plan in the family. We're trying to literally wrap our mind around it, which visually should bring the sense of makif. We're trying to surround it, right? And grasp it. But in doing so, the interesting thing is the other side happens, that as we try to grasp it from the outside and wrap our mind around it, it enters into us and we become possessed, or we become enveloped by it. So we try to envelop it, but it also envelops us at the same time. Both happen at the same time. There's a progression. That's what's called the area. And then we have these stages, and these stages also parallel other stages, the famous stages of the Baal Shem Tov, which is submission, separation, sweetening. Hachna'a, Havdalah, Hamtaka. To think about it in Hebrew. Okay. When we take this meditation that Rav Ginsburgh is bringing from the arena of mathematics and physics, and we focus on the original verse, with all my heart, I seek you, Hashem. So the starting point is focusing on that is the objective. That's the objective. That's, as a Jew, that is my objective. With all my heart, I seek you, Hashem. And then we're going to go in a well-defined direction that includes certain parameters of orientation. In order to actually accomplish this, there's going to come into our consciousness, how do we set up the parameters, the boundaries, the thresholds, the entrance ways, how we're going to walk on the path, what we're going to be doing, that are going to allow us to progress and be conscious about what we're seeking, which is this connection with God with all my heart, right? And those parameters are called the 6 spatial dimensions surrounding us. What are the 6 spatial dimensions? You can relate to being in a sukkah and shaking a lulav, although they're not going to be in the same order, but we will review that in the book. So the 6 spatial directions that exist in all the world for all time are above and below, front and back, right and left. Those are all the directions that exist, above and below, front and back, right and left. Each of which corresponds to one of the 6 constant commandments that we call the duties of the heart in the Torah, that are meant to ensure our constant awareness of God. So when I started at the beginning and I said we really want to feel the guidance of God, and we want to feel that God is close to us and with us, and that my sense was if we study this, this is going to show us a way to do it. Because it's going to ensure, by learning this, it's going to ensure and develop within us a very keen, deep sense of constant awareness of God. And that will be us trying to grasp God. But then there's going to be another aspect of it, which is God enveloping and us in this, what's going to be called living in a divine space. The full area, remember the area, of meditative consciousness is becoming so engrossed in the depth of the meditation. Your meditation could be with all my heart, I seek you. It could be Hashem is recreating creation every moment, yesh ma'ayin. It could be think good and it will be good. Think good thoughts and those good thoughts will actually produce vibrations in the world where things will become good in the reality, in the godly reality. So there are many concepts from the Torah that one can meditate upon. Pick up where I was. So we can become so well, our awareness can be so well developed in the meditation on both an intellectual and emotional plane, that we transcend the limited state that we call self-consciousness, and we undergo a metamorphosis, and we become one with the divine truth that is embodied in the meditation. So there's a certain goal that's being stated here in the introduction to the Sefer Living in Divine Space and the 6 duties of the heart, where it is that we want to be able to develop our mind and our heart connection with these 6 constant mitzvot to the extent that they take us to an expanded consciousness where whereas we meet with God. We actually meet with God. Rather than God being, we talked last week about there's an experience of God being outside us and then God being inside us. The light is outside us, the goodness is outside us, and then we have to take it in and see it and really believe it and experience it. So that's part of this concept of learning the duties of the heart. Now, a little bit more he needs to add in order to get us into beginning to look at the 6 constant commandments, that Chazal, the sages, refer to prayer as the service of the heart. Since the initial point of meditation is, with all my heart I seek you, it can be understood as the service of the heart. We see that there exists an intrinsic relationship between meditation, awareness of godliness, meditating on the godless, the greatness of God, meditating on how God woke us up this morning, on everything that's hashgacha pratis in our lives, that God gives us, all of the amazing brachas that we have in our lives right now, this very day, this very moment. All of these meditations are connected with our prayer. And they're connected also with Hashem's prayers for us, Hashem's desires and ratzon for us. Indeed, prayer is the culmination, the consummate expression of this 6-phase meditation. And it's the point of focus actually in the middle. Well, in the following, when we develop this more, then we'll get to, of the 6 constant mitzvot that surround us, above and below, front and back, right and left, there is in that space, that living divine space, there is a middle point, and that point is ani tefillah, I am prayer. So the prayer is the 7th point. It's right in the middle, as if we are standing in the middle of that living in divine space, and we are praying in order to connect. So that's what he's referring to. That prayer is the point of the 6 directions of divine space and creating it into a living experience. As will be explained, prayer is the striving of the soul. Right? We want our souls to strive. That's a good idea. That's also a very good idea. Prayer is the striving of the soul to transform the meditative state into divine life, to metamorphosize out of a state of self-consciousness into a state of divine consciousness. So there the goal is set. We want to be able to connect with Hashem so that we change, we transform out of a state of self-consciousness, and that we come into the state of godly, of divine consciousness. And that's practice all the time. That's not just we arrive there once and then we sort of hover there. That's a constant avoda, it's constant work on our part. Every day, every moment of every day, we're striving to be able to try to enter into that divine space at least a few times a day during prayer or during study, during connection with Hashem, to try and enter it. Okay, so we're gonna start chapter 1, which is called The Soul and Reality. What is the soul in terms of reality? The mind is the interface between the soul and reality. Our minds, our seichel, our intellect, all that we think of when we think of seichel, of mind, is the interface between the soul and reality. All of us are constantly bombarded with stimuli and sensations from the outer world. And it is our mind which processes this onrush of sensations. You could take for a moment and picture yourself in a deeply wooded, green, lush, oxygen-rich forest that's quiet, except for the birds and the flowers and the air around you. Or you could picture yourself in a huge mall at the busiest time of year, at the busiest moment, and the amount of noise and overstimulation that are going on there. And obviously, that's a stark contrast, but you could understand from that that wherever we are at any given moment, our mind is taking in just tons of information, processing it, sorting it out to enable us to make distinctions and go forward. What's the most important part of this in terms of our, with all my heart, I seek you, God, is that our mind determines which sensations are to be taken note of, and then classifies and arranges them and decides which response is appropriate to which stimulus based upon past experience or principles that you hold by. So it's the mind that sorts through everything and makes decisions on a very fast level. We are not conscious of this process happening. It's really a miracle about which sensations, which stimuli and input coming in to pay attention to, which to shelve permanently, which to shelve temporarily. I can deal with that later. Here's the main thing. Here's what to focus on, what's going on here, and then which response is appropriate to that stimulus, that input. And it's all based upon our past experience and our principles, various things that we learned, obviously, from the Torah. It is the mind, then, that determines how we relate to our environment in reality. To actualize, to realize ourselves in life to the fullest extent, we must provide our mind with the proper tools to process reality and relate to it. This is a fundamental purpose of Jewish meditation, prayer, connection to God. Mindfulness, awareness, focused thought is very important in connecting to God. And the primary purpose is to know what we're processing, what really the true reality, the true godly reality is. Through this focused thought, we take the untamed mind. The mind is there to respond to everything in God's world. So the mind is open, and then it has to sort through everything, which is a big job. So through focused thought, through Jewish meditation, we'll call it focused thought, we take the untamed mind and train it to think in terms of images that are based on truth. By leading a subject through deeper and deeper levels of abstraction, we reach deeper dimensions of the mind and gradually change ourselves and the way we respond to the world around and within us. What is the deeper truth? Torah, the emes of God in the world. God is one. Everything is coming from Hashem, right? So we're taking our focused thought, and it is helping us to attach to that truth through the training of the mind, and we're doing that through the precepts of the Torah. Now, there are basically two general ways to learn. One learns in a sense what we'll call, let's say, an overview, a general broad-based knowledge that's acquired through many ideas, through many concepts. So you could be reviewing 100 different things or 1,000 different things throughout all time during your life, and they all have something in common. There's a general aspect to them, and that's broad-based knowledge, right? That's an overview. And then there's focused learning, almost like a laser beam. You notice I was going like this, overview, and now we have the laser point coming into focus. This is in-depth study. It's narrow and it's singular, and it's focused on one concept. And by focusing on that one concept, you can actually go deeper and deeper and deeper in that one concept. Now, what's fascinating about both these ways of learning is we need both of them. They're applicable to our daily lives. And they both enrich us deeper and deeper in terms of our connection with Hashem. But there are different mechanisms that the mind uses in terms of focused thought and learning. To this end, seasoned practitioners of focused thought meditation will make use of the whole range of biblical, Talmudic, Kabbalistic, Chassidic literature to fertilize the potent ground of their mind's imagination and the mind's faculty of association. When evaluated in the context of Torah, knowledge of science, of mathematics, of nature, of God's creation can also be summoned to the same end, meaning everything is possible in God's world to bring into a godly context in this broader overview of learning. The aim is to produce a conceptual garden of ever-evolving, multi-dimensional images and insights into reality that will serve as the context and content of getting to know God. I'm going to repeat that concept, what we just read. So when you're talking about a person who wants to seek Hashem, and he's going to do it by learning Chassidus, halacha, biblical, Talmudic literature, in order to fertilize, in order to bring a richness and a multiplicity into the learning, right? And it's going to feed, it's going to fertilize the ground of the person's learning, their imagination, the faculty of association, associative thought, and even in the extent of learning knowledge of what are called pure sciences, physics, quantum physics, mathematics, nature, God's creation, they also can be summoned into this general learning of knowledge in order to see and connect with godliness in the world. And that, which is an overview of so many multiple diverse aspects of God's creation, can bring about a very rich garden of ever-evolving, multi-dimensional images and insights into reality. And all of this will serve as a very rich context and content of godly awareness. Now, Jewish meditation is called the preparation for all prayer, for all avoda, for all of our work, our carrying out work, and for all connection to our source in Hashem. In other words, we're meant to learn and meditate upon Jewish precepts and concepts prior to entering into prayer, during doing mitzvahs and acts of goodness and kindness, all of our work, all of our avoda in the world that God has given us in our personal and community worldwide missions. And we have to also do this as a way of connecting with our source, with our godly source. In Jewish meditation, we strive to understand in depth the divine truths embodied in the Torah and in the marvels of God's creation, which in themselves bind us to God, the Creator, and His Torah. When we're trying to understand the depth of divine truths, let's say, within the marvels of nature, and we're really seeking to see godliness there in the hide and seek game, so they also bind us. Finding God in those places, seeing God in those places, binds us to God as our Creator and His architectural plan of truth, Torah Emet. And we also strive to establish points of connection between them in our personal life. So not only are we seeking God, not only are we practicing this through our prayer, through our focused thought, using the talents and the gifts of our mind to be able to make connections, but we're meant to establish those points of connection with God and bring them into our personal life so that they begin to have application and relevance. We enhance the potency of our meditation by hearing the holy words of the Torah, ideally in Hebrew, the language of creation, and simultaneously envisioning the holy letters. Like we would count a jewel one by one. That's how precious the otiot, the holy Hebrew letters are. Enamored by each aleph bet, unable to let it go and leave it in order to pass on to the next. We bind each letter to the next one as one binds one flower to another, creating a beautiful bouquet. It's very poetic language the Rav is using, but he's really teaching us how incredibly precious the channels of creation are that we call the Aleph Beit, that they're divine. They have divine, pulsating, alive, vibrant, godly energy in them at every moment. And when we say our prayers or we learn in Lashon HaKodesh, in the Hebrew language, so it brings another level with it. If this is difficult for you, try with a study partner, a chavruta, try at least to say part of it, maybe one word, maybe a phrase in Hebrew, then explain it in the language, obviously, that you're comfortable with, but at least to look at the letters while the person maybe who's better at reading the Hebrew reads it to you. So you make a transition, you make a connection to those letters. Especially, we're supposed to do this when we're saying the Shema. One should really strive to say that in Hebrew. Okay. To know God. Jewish meditation begins with the awareness that God has instructed us to meditate on him and his omnipresence in order to experience and know God in every facet at every moment of our lives. We must first commit ourselves to fulfill his command. As the Torah states, you shall know this day and take to heart that God is God in the heavens above and on the earth below, and there is no other. In the Tanya, the classic text of Chassidic thought by the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shiur Zalman of Liadi, the Alter Rebbe concurs with the opinion of those rabbinic authorities who count this verse as one of the 613 commandments of the Torah. The one that I just read, you shall know this day and take to heart that God is God in the heavens above and on the earth below, and there is no other. Defining it as the commandment to know God by contemplating God and his continual creation of the universe. In meditation and focused thought, our hearts are aroused to turn away from ego-oriented pursuits that normally fill our consciousness, which are really illusory states of existence. And instead, we turn towards the one true reality, which is God. So there's a turning point when we're using focused thought. Our mind, as we said, even though it's sifting through lots of details in order to help us focus, it could still be on what do I need to cook today? And therefore, what food do I need to buy from the market? And what time am I going to prepare it? And on and on and on. And you can get really lost in the whole thought of planning like a meal for the day. And okay, that's necessary. It's good. But there's a point at which you have to be able to depart from that as often as possible and really focus on the true reality, which is God, who's creating the menu for the day, by the way. So we should keep that in mind, recreating the food rega berega moment, and your stove that's going to cook it, and your wooden spoons that you're going to use, etc. As in the case with regard of all human effort and endeavor, the effectiveness of the focused thought is clearly a gift from God. This is an important point. How well we do this, the effectiveness of it, is a gift from Hashem. We are meant to make the effort and try. And really, God is going to gift us through our effort with what shefa from the superconsciousness, from the realm of godliness, is going to come into our consciousness. We are granted free choice, which we must utilize to its maximum extent. In the case of focused thought, we must search for God from the depths of our hearts in order to be worthy of this gift that we're calling the divine revelation. Additionally, in order for the seeds of meditation to take root in the soul, to grow and bear fruit, we ourselves must become fertile earth. This depends upon our spiritual acquisition of humility and selflessness. Here's a whole new paragraph chock full of very important information. In order for the seeds of meditation to grow close to God, with all my heart I seek you, to take root in the soul, to grow and bear fruit, that our lives become godly, productive lives, we ourselves must become fertile earth. We ourselves must do our work in order to open up the ground of our being to receive the shefa from God and all of the messages and all the hashgacha pratis. We have to create a fertile place for those seeds of meditation to grow and those messages from Hashem. And what does this depend upon? It depends upon our spiritual acquisition of humility and selflessness. He's going to do a brief segue to introduce this concept, and throughout the book, this is going to come up more and more. This acquisition of humility and selflessness in order to acquire divine revelation and godly connection. A beginner might mistakenly understand Jewish meditation as an attempt to clear the mind and transcend the normative thought process. Clearing the mind of foreign thoughts that disturb the focus of meditation is definitely a prerequisite to entering the meditative state, but it is not the goal. It is not the essence of meditation itself. Chassidus teaches us that meditation involves thought, deep contemplative thought. For meditation is the search to find God, literally, concretely in our world as well. Meditation is intended to translate divine insight as perceived instinctively by the divine soul into the context of the natural intelligence that we call the intelligence of the animal soul. We're meant to take that divine insight and bring it all the way down into our regular, normative, mundane existence of the animal soul, of our physical metzius, our physical being, and translate it there so that it translates into something that the animal soul can grasp and act upon, right? So this is the basic aspect of the life force that animates our physical selves. We achieve this through clear and well-directed thought, making use of precise parables, metaphors, and psychological or physical examples related to the divine concepts that compose the essence of our meditation. In short, on that sentence, we're going, throughout the book, there are going to be analogies, parables, metaphors, and examples of how to attach to the 6 duties of the heart, of how to contemplate them, how to think upon them, so that they come concretely into our world, into our physical existence. Now he's going to bring an example of what he's talking about. There's a divine concept in creation called ex nihilo, out of nothing. Yesh mayan, something from nothing. Ex nihilo. And it might be translated into a context understood by the animal soul via the parable of the seed. By meditating on how the seed must first go into the ground, and when the seed enters the ground, the first thing that starts to happen to the seed is it starts to decompose. And it decomposes, and it decomposes more over time, and it rots in the ground, reverting to a relative state of nothingness. And once the seed has decomposed sufficiently enough, it actually then sprouts at that moment from the eternal aspect of godliness that is in the fertile earth, which is called koach hatzameach, the power of growth. It's an eternal part of godliness that God put into, in the 10 sayings of creation that God put into the earth. So then when the seed decomposes, when it decomposes sufficiently enough, do you get where we're headed here? We're talking about our ego becoming humble. When we decompose enough, in our fertile ground, we're able to touch the beginning of sprouting, of entering into godliness. That's the mashal that's being quoted. It's actually in the Tanya. So when the seed decomposes and rots in the ground, returning to a relative state of nothingness, right then it sprouts into a plant. And when it sprouts, we are, so to speak, able to intellectually grasp the idea of God's constant recreation of the world. When we have sufficient enough humility and we've stepped out of our ego and all of the ego desires that like take up and clutter a lot of the attic of our mind so that we can't even think straight. When we clear out the attic and make a lot of space, make the ground very fertile and receptive, and we open up in this way of humility and selflessness, and that's all of that work is the decomposing of the seed. Because the seed is a mitzias, it has an existence. But to the extent that it would just stay a seed, it would never sprout. It must decompose in order to contact the power of growth that's in the earth, and only then can it sprout. And so too, we also must, so to speak, decompose or open up and remove that which is blocking the entrance of the godly light, which is going to fertilize our mind, the seeds in our mind, to open up to the first conceptual awareness of godliness being in our life. And the idea of God's constant recreation of the world. Through this focused thought, in-depth meditation, we refine our intellect, we refine our mind. We're making choices. The mind is no longer just being bombarded by any stimuli. It's being enriched by the study of Torah, by prayer, by learning, by seeing hashgacha pratis in life and tuning into it. So our intellect, our mind that grasps stimuli in the world is being refined. And once it becomes refined, it's like tuning in a radio station. Once you really get good reception, you want to stay with that good reception because you hear clearly. You get the messages clearly. So when you're refining your mind, it's like getting very good reception, and you want to stay with that channel because you're hearing very clearly, right? So again, through this focused meditation, we refine our intellect, which in of itself is a gift of God, our mind, our seichel, to become a channel for divine awareness and increasing divine consciousness, allowing that divine consciousness and presence of God in our lives to permeate our day-to-day consciousness and our normative state of being on a daily level. And this is the introduction that we'll have in mind as we begin our meditation, which is going to be called Living in Divine Space. Okay, so we're going to end the recording there, not the, where do we do that? End.